Rock Creek Drainage District 1 and the Rock Creek Drainage District 2. Laura Smith will give a brief presentation on the proposed budget before we take comments from the public. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And this is our legally required public hearing that we hold each year on the budget. From those in the audience who may not know, we do budget for the City of Mission, which includes over a dozen individual funds. And then we also have responsibility for setting the mill levy for Rock Creek Drainage District number 1 and number 2. And I'll go over those in a little bit more detail, but so this is going to be our opportunity to sort of run through the proposed budget. We were here 2 weeks ago for a community dialogue. I see many of the same faces, so thank you for being back with us this evening. Where we kind of left off in that presentation, we didn't present a specific proposed budget as a part of that community dialogue. Kind of laid out the issues that have floated to the top in the 2016 budget that we're faced with, talked about challenges and opportunities, and really left with what we hoped a 2016 proposed budget would accomplish. And we were looking, coming out of that meeting 2 weeks ago, for a budget that would provide adequate stormwater revenues to cover existing debt service, funds at some level to replace the transportation utility fee that is not going to be assessed in the 2016 budget, and maintaining current service delivery levels for all of our departments. So those are kind of the key points we want to talk about tonight. We want to talk about the specifics and the actual mill levies, rates, goals and objectives that are now included in the proposed 2016 budget. One of the questions that we had when we were together 2 weeks ago was whether we would have the ETC Direction Finder survey results and that we might be able to use or at least have those available to us as we move through the rest of the budget process. So the next couple of slides, we do have those results back on a preliminary basis. We will have a full report that's going to come back to the council in the next probably 30 to 60 days. You'll remember that Direction Finder is primarily a citizen satisfaction survey, but we did ask some very direct questions related to specific priorities. So this first slide just kind of shows you the respondent locations. So ETC through that process guarantees a survey response of 400 in order for us to have a statistically valid survey. And we had 592 responses to the survey. And this will show you where the dots are located, and we did have good representation throughout the city. And I will tell you that we did have representation of both single family and multifamily property owners in the survey. And the next slide, one of the questions that we have asked in the Direction Finder survey in the years that we have asked it is, we asked the citizens to tell us the city services that should receive the most emphasis over the next 2 years by major category. And as you can see, city's efforts to promote redevelopment was the number one when you combine. So they get to pick 3 options: first choice, second choice, third choice. So when we combine everyone's first, second, and third choice, the city's planning efforts to promote redevelopment comes to the top, followed very closely by maintenance of city streets, and then quality and livability of city's neighborhoods, although there's a pretty significant gap and drop off between the top 2 and that next tier. But one of the things, if you go to the next slide, please, if you look at that issue of quality and livability in our residential neighborhoods, we asked a follow-up question in the Direction Finder that said, identify for us the top 3 things that you think could be done in your neighborhood to actually improve the overall quality of that. So in response to that question, you'll see that the number 1 response there from our residents was increased street and curb maintenance to improve the quality of the neighborhood, more sidewalks, also related to kind of transportation network, and then increased private property maintenance, and you'll see the rest. And many of these other things through here in the rest of the Direction Finder survey will also be used in our park master plan process. But that kind of gave us the highest level of overview as to where the respondents to this survey thought the city should continue to focus attention. I don't think we were surprised by any of those results. They're fairly consistent actually with the results that we saw both in 2007 and 2011. But it's always important to sort of test kind of where we are. So with that, as we move into kind of the more specific discussion of the 2016 budget, Following all of our conversations over the last several months and our discussions in the work sessions in July, earlier part of July, the budget that is before you tonight for consideration at this public hearing includes a 4.5 mill levy increase, and that mill levy increase would generate about $535,000 annually, and all of that mill levy increase would be transferred and used for street maintenance or to replace transportation utility fee revenues. An additional $5 per ERU per month that would be used to fund debt service in the stormwater fund. That increase generates about $450,000 annually, and really squares us up as it relates to managing those debt service obligations. This budget also includes, it does include some capital. It includes a replacement of the highest priority capital items for all of the departments. So frontline patrol vehicles, a skid steer in the Public Works Department, the phone system here at City Hall, and a truck for Neighborhood Services Department. But we did defer an additional $220,000 of the department's capital equipment requests in order to get to a balanced budget for 2016. As we've talked about, we'll be making somewhere between a $485,000 and $500,000 transfer out of the general fund in 2015 to cover debt service. So, and you may recall that in the 2015 budget, we held several positions vacant. We deferred some capital. And we said at the time we put that budget together, if we end the year better than expected, we may come back to the council and ask you to add some of those things back into the budget. As it turns out, our highest priority need is stormwater debt service, so we're not asking you to go back and fund those needs which were deferred in the 15 budget, but rather we're suggesting that we use that. We did add to fund balance almost $1 million at the end of 14, so we're suggesting that we take that to make that stormwater payment in this current budget year. But we're also then trying to balance and keep the 2016 budget at a level in the general fund where we've got a general fund balance of no less than $2 million. Current council policy suggests a 25% of general fund revenue fund balance, which would be closer to about $2.5 million. So we're still shy of our goal, but we've made significant progress in that direction. That's important for maintaining our rating with the bond rating agency's credit ratings. Also in the 2016 budget, coming off of the work of a community center task force, we've challenged the community center to increase their cost recovery goal from 80% to 90% in the 16 budget. So that looks at a lot of belt tightening and other things to accomplish that. And we're working to move that actually to 100% cost recovery in the 2017 budget. This 2016 budget, also based on the council's conversation, anticipates a future vote on a new sales tax for additional street maintenance costs. We obviously can't accomplish that and know the results of that prior to the time we have to certify the 2016 budget to the county. But the council has had significant conversations about making up. A full TUF replacement would have been approximately 7 mills. The proposal is 4.5 mills. We know we do have a gap in, even with the TUF that was funded at its current level, to address streets in the city that need full depth replacement and the larger CARS eligible projects, things like Fox Ridge, additional sections of Johnson Drive. And so the conversation at this point has been, we would look at that sales tax to help close that gap. The election office would require a 6-month notification before we could bring anything forward on a ballot. So put the 2016 budget to bed, and then we'll come back and have a very structured and specific conversation about how to proceed with the sales tax election. I think as most people are familiar, we generally look at funding the operations of the cities in 2 general categories. We have the general fund, which is about $10 million annually, which funds all of our operating departments. And then we fund infrastructure, streets, stormwater, parks and recreation out of dedicated revenue streams primarily. So when we look at general fund sources of revenues in the general fund, estimated in 2016, now this excludes the 4.5 mils increase, because that's basically a pass-through in the general fund. It would be levied in the general fund and then immediately transferred out to the street side. So the benefit of that mill increase does not impact or influence your general fund operations. So when we back that number out, we're looking at about $10.18 million in revenue in the general fund for 2016. The primary revenue source is sales and use tax at about 38% of those overall revenues. Use tax is the sales tax essentially that's charged on internet sales and purchases. So it is a form of a sales tax. Followed then by property tax. So this property tax percentage that's shown here would reflect basically holding the mill levy that from 2015 constant to fund those general fund operations. So that makes up about 15% of the revenues in the general fund. Fines and fees are those things that are generated through the police department and our municipal court. Franchise fees are paid by residents and businesses on your utility bills. Parks and recreation revenues are those fees and charges associated with the community center and the outdoor aquatic center. And then the miscellaneous and other revenue category. So we're required by state law to submit a balanced budget, approve a balanced budget each year. So we look at revenues of $10.18 million, and if you go to the next slide, we have general fund expenditures of $10.13 million. So we're basically at that balanced budget level without dipping any further into our general fund balance. Fund balance may be used to balance a budget according to state law, but since we are not yet at our fund balance goal, the council has directed us over the last several years to bring forward a budget that doesn't dip any further into that. So if you look at, no surprise, I think the largest expenditure on an annual basis out of the general fund is for our public safety department at about 34%. Parks and recreation expenditures and public works expenditures are pretty equal at 22 and 24%. And then you look at administration, which includes administration, finance, human resources, community development, neighborhood services. And then transfers or others that would include a transfer of the subsidy of the residential solid waste contract, which is about $85,000 a year, which is included in the 2016 budget. Debt service on the streetlights system that we acquired several years ago, and some other miscellaneous expenses. If you go to the next slide, this is one we looked at a couple of weeks ago, but if you look at kind of the historical picture of general fund revenues and expenses, you can see that essentially for the last 5 or 6 years, on the revenue side and the expenditure side, we've been relatively flat. So we're really just maintaining, we're not adding or increasing services in the general fund with the revenues that we see. While we do see some shifting in terms of revenues generated between those categories, we don't have any one category that generates enough revenue to kind of keep up with inflation or a lot of that growth. So we're constantly managing capital expenditures, personnel expenditures throughout the year. That doesn't just happen once a year at the annual budget process. The other side then, we look at infrastructure funding. You can see we started to chart this back in 2010. The city made some very conscious efforts to move to transparent and dedicated revenue streams to fund infrastructure in the areas of stormwater, street, and parks and recreation. So you'll see the top bar represents our stormwater revenues, and these come from the stormwater utility fee and from the Rock Creek Drainage District. So the Rock Creek Drainage District number 1 is essentially the gateway side. It does not include any other property other than the gateway side. Rock Creek Drainage District number 2 picks up from Roland Drive and extends basically to Lamar. Those drainage districts where we've invested up to this point the most significant amount of the stormwater improvements that have occurred today have an additional 10.5 mils that are levied through those drainage districts. Rock Creek Drainage District number 1 generates somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 in revenue a year. Rock Creek Drainage District number 2 generates about $78,000 a year. All of those funds are currently being used for debt service. on our stormwater projects. So the line here that you see on this infrastructure chart represents the growth and where the additional $5 per ERU per month would take us in looking at stormwater infrastructure funding. The gray bar, middle bar are dedicated street revenues. Dedicated street revenues come, for the last several years, have come from three sources. Special highway tax that's distributed to us from the state of Kansas that totals about $250,000 a year. Quarter-cent sales tax, which was approved by the voters in 2012 for the 10-year sunset that generates between $500,000 and $550,000 a year. And then the transportation utility fee, which was generating about $775,000 to $800,000 a year. Those were being used for debt service on street projects, for our annual street maintenance project, and then to leverage federal and county dollars for larger projects, most recently the Martway reconstruction and Johnson Drive reconstruction. Again, without levying TUF in the 2016 budget, I think the conversations, the council was interested in maintaining the residential street maintenance program that includes our mill and overlay and our chip seal. Certainly not wanting to take a step backward on that program. At your place this evening, I left you a map. I think sometimes I have to see it visually. And this is actually the work that has either been completed or was recently approved under 2016 street maintenance contracts. But this is just a map of the streets that have been touched as a result of the implementation of a comprehensive street maintenance program since 2010. And I think we can kind of see we've had a fairly significant impact. We know that we have lots of work left in front of us. One of the things that we've talked about is we're waiting on core sampling for the streets in the program from 2017 through 2019. Part of what we will bring back to you later this fall will identify visually for you where those full depth reconstruction streets are located and kind of the cost to begin to address those issues. And then on the Parks and Recreation side, prior to 2012, the dedicated Parks and Recreation revenue came from a third of the special alcohol revenue that's distributed to the city from the state of Kansas, about $42,000 annually. In 2012, again, the voters approved a 3/8 cent sales tax dedicated to Parks and Recreation. A portion of that is to be used for debt service for the construction of the outdoor aquatic facility, and the balance of that is used for maintenance of facilities and equipment at the community center, as well as improvements and maintenance of our outdoor park system. I think then, if we come back, looking at the infrastructure side, one of the questions that we asked in the Direction Finder survey is, within the public works service delivery area, what are the services that should receive the most emphasis over the next 2 years? If our residents were one thing, I think they were consistent in the Direction Finder survey. You see here maintenance of city streets at the neighborhood level, and maintenance of sidewalks, and then maintenance of major thoroughfares are the top three public works services in that category. One of the things that we asked this year in the Direction Finder survey that we haven't asked as specifically in previous years was identify for us 3 areas where you would be willing to support increased investment by the city. So respondents here were able to pick their top 3 choices, and so when those first, second, and third choices are combined, again you see that maintenance of residential streets, redevelopment of the commercial areas, and maintenance of major thoroughfares top the list. We also then, in this year's survey, asked respondents to tell us, okay, not just, one of the things we've heard from previous surveys was, you can ask people a lot of things, but if you don't ask them how much they're willing to pay for it, it's kind of an open-ended question. So we tried to close the loop a little bit in this year's Direction Finder survey, and we said, okay, of those things that you identified that you would be willing to support increased investment in, how much would you be willing to invest to do so? And so this pie chart really breaks that down. And we broke that down in terms of, I wouldn't be willing to spend anything more per month, and you see 17% of the respondents indicated that. $1 to $5 per month more, 21%, $6 to $10 at 32%, $4 14% at $11 to $15, and 17% at $16 to $20 per month. If you go to the next slide, one of the things that we are always sensitive to and looking at is trying to balance what is that impact of any increases in fees or taxes. What impact does that have on a $150,000 home, which is the average price of a home here in Mission? So if you look at this chart and you look at 2015, in 2015, at a $150,000 house, of their tax bill that came to the city of Mission, they paid $196 in property tax, $72 in the transportation utility fee, $276 in stormwater fees, and $163 towards solid waste or the residential trash service. So a total per year of $707, $59 a month, or $1.90 a day. In 2016, if you were to approve the budget as proposed with the 4.5 mil increase, the $5 per ERU per month, this is what that change would represent on an average to an average home. So you see, we tried to show you the change by category. So your property tax is going to increase to $273 a year. The top goes away. Stormwater is at $336, and solid waste would stay the same. So you really see that net change on an annual basis of $65 a year, or about $5.47 or $5.50 a month. Which I think puts us kind of at the low end, certainly within the reach of that pie chart in terms of that investment and where this budget is what we heard the council's continued investment wanted to be. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, or I can be available for questions throughout the rest of the public hearing and any comments.
Have we done an analysis based on the $150,000 residential property? Have we done an analysis since the county has raised its taxes the 1st of July on what that would be for the house?
So some people's property taxes get increased. What do you mean the county raised?
The county increased their mill levy. And so we can run that very easily. We have not done that, but we can certainly run that number to show you now that I think all the dust has settled on all of the taxing entities that feed into Mission residents' tax bill. We can give you that. But the county increased by 3 mills for the county itself. There's a little bit of an increase for the Parks and Recreation District as well as the library. But we can certainly add that. The one thing we look at, and we talked about this 2 weeks ago, and I'm sorry, I did forget to mention this. So the impact on commercial properties is really hard to calculate. So when you take away a TUF, which is a fee that was driven by the amount of traffic generated, and you switch to the mill, you're going to have some people who come out ahead, and some people who pay less, some people pay more. So if you were a high traffic generator, like a big box retail store, probably going to see a reduction in your overall tax bill when we shift from paying for streets from the TUF to the property tax. If you were a low traffic generator in a building with a high property value, there's a chance that you might pay slightly more in an overall tax bill, because we're changing the philosophy and the methodology that the fee structures are based on. Oh, so sorry, Jennifer.
Sorry,
okay.
Laura. Well, when I was looking at this, I remember when we did the Johnson Drive, we had a revenue stream for the previous stormwater debt before we did Johnson Drive, correct? Was that not balanced? I thought it was, the revenue stream was balanced prior to Johnson Drive.
Yes, with a $500,000 transfer from the general fund every year.
And that is what we're trying to reduce with the 5 ERUs.
Yes. Because you've seen a
So hold on,
reduction.
wait a minute.
So when we restructured debt,
So we're short $500,000 now, and you're saying that prior to Johnson Drive, we still were doing $500,000 every year?
Transfer from the general fund. And then we did the $2 million interceptor that was on that.
Because there wasn't an appetite to increase the ERU,
We did increase the ERUs though.
but not enough to,
We were 1 ERU short though. So we did pass it knowing it wasn't fully funded, we did.
So you've got a couple of things that have compounded
That's what I-
since then.
yes.
So you put together a debt restructuring plan for the 2010 debt issue that relied on a $500,000 transfer from the general fund. And you were coming off of, the 2009 budget year was a really high peak. It was our highest point in terms of some of our other revenue streams in the general fund. So revenues in the general fund have come down to the tune of almost $800,000 overall since that debt restructuring plan was put in place. And so we've seen a reduction in fine and fee revenues. We've seen a reduction or not the same kind of growth that we had seen previously in property tax revenues, because shortly after then we went into a period, as did most other cities in Johnson County, where overall property values were declining. So the same mills weren't generating the same revenues. So you had a gap that was kind of expanding or challenged to figure out how to come up with that $500,000. And then you had the interceptor, which we funded at a certain level, but it wasn't sufficient to cover all of that. And so you kind of have that has compounded over the last several years to get us to this point where you need about $450,000 to cover that debt service. It's kind of a mix of things that have happened over the last 5 to 6 years.
Thank you.
Lord, when we refinanced the bonds, I thought we were, how much money did we save on that refinance?
Saved about $1.1 million over the life of the bond issue.
So, $2 million interceptor and $500,000 transfer, we're still only $450,000. Okay, thank you.
Anyone in the audience would like to comment, please just step to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Frank Bruce, 5706 of the WAR. And can we go back to the pie chart on page 5, please? Okay, that's sources of funds. The next one down, please.
Expenditures, probably.
Expenses.
Yep.
Expenses. The next pie chart down on page 5.
That's
There.
expenses.
All right. Now, my question is a yardstick question. Can you tell me?
Is it what question?
I'm sorry?
Is it what question?
Yardstick.
Yardstick.
I don't know how we compare to our fellow cities up here in the northeast quadrant. And my question is, on the public works, I'd like to know what our cost is per street mile compared with the other cities, and it could be an average of the other cities, and what our costs are in the other parts of the pie chart per capita compared to the other cities.
We'll probably have to get
Sounds
some
like a homework
information on that.
assignment.
Yes.
Well, that's fine, but how do we know how we're doing unless we compare ourselves with the other cities that are doing business in comparable
Yeah, we have to get a
areas?
comparable city.
Well, if you put it
city
per
staff.
capita, then we're pretty much on the level, and per street mile, we're pretty much on level.
Yep.
So I would very much like to see that information.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll get to you. Thanks, Frank. Anyone else? Anybody? Any takers? Well, if there's no further comments, the public hearings on the 2016 budget for the City of Mission, the Rock Creek Drainage District 1 and the Rock Creek Drainage District 2 are closed. Thank you for coming. We will now move on with the rest of our work session agenda. Does anyone have any more questions for Laura? Any explanation?
Is this all going to be on the website?
The packet that you received on Friday has been posted on the website, so it will stay out there. We will put this presentation, PowerPoint presentation on the web tonight. And then our next steps from here, unless unless you provide us with some direction on any other changes that you would like to see to the proposed budget, we'll need to turn this into the budget documents that come to your committee meeting next week.
Any discussion? Anyone?
So, I mean, I have a question around, I'm confused, to be honest, about if the 4.5 mil does not replace the current transportation utility fee expenses to taxpayers, the amount charged to taxpayers, is the stormwater making up the difference? You see what, so it looks like here, we're gonna on average charge $65 more a year, but we're 7 mils would replace the current transportation utility fee being paid across the city. And so 7 mils is what I heard is comparable to that. We're only charging 4.5. So how are our tax bills going up when we're short?
Commercial properties on the whole aren't paying as much
Well,
overall.
On the residential side, so 7 mils is going to cost more than the $72 in top. And so that's why,
But because there are more participants in the transportation utility fee currently paying into that pool than would be paying in a mill.
Same number of participants, just at a lower rate.
different.
Nope,
yeah,
not the same number of
completely-
participants. You have tax exempt properties who don't pay mill at all, who do pay transportation utility fees, like the post office.
They don't pay
Yeah.
anyway.
So you are
They did pay.
Now you're
leaving out
against-
exempt properties. Yes, but it becomes so, the calculation is just, is very different in terms of, so you take your assessed valuation of your property, and residential property is assessed at a different rate than commercial property, and so you have to figure out the amount that you're gonna be assessed times your mill levy to determine that. So I may not be understanding maybe your question entirely.
So the 4.5 mil is raises $535,000, right? Did I
Yes.
get that okay?
Yes,
And then the ERU is 450.
yes.
Okay, 450,000. Okay, we are 525-ish thousand short from a stormwater perspective and 775,000 short from a transportation utility fee perspective. Correct?
If you want to replace TUF at its current level, this year's
So
budget.
resoundingly, our residents are saying the number one priority in this city needs to be streets. And we know that the $775,000 from the transportation utility fee revenue currently is not sufficient to meet our current needs, let alone to be, do the other things like sidewalks and all of that our residents are asking for, right, from a priority perspective. So if we simply said, just to make the revenues even with the removal of the transportation utility fee, our only option is an increase in mill levy. And that would require 7 mil, an increase in 7 mils. And then did we have, I've been looking through all my information, did we have a comparable mill? I saw sales tax, but I didn't see what other mills. I know we're the lowest in Johnson County from the mill levy perspective. I know, I was re-looking through all my stuff. That's sales tax.
That's
We
the sales
didn't,
tax.
we didn't put it in.
Yeah.
I couldn't find that. So I know we're one of the lowest, I get that, but to be honest, I think when people purchase homes, they look at the tax bill. On average, what's the tax bill for the residents when you, I don't know, I'm not a real estate agent, but I don't know that people really look at mill levy and get into a big discussion on mill levy. I mean, granted, government discussion is around that.
You've got several compare and contrast too. The TUF for every residential property, whether it was a $600,000 property or a $20,000 property, was $72. That's going to be different on property tax because it's based on the valuation of the property. So that's kind of an apples and oranges comparison. However, the property tax is tax deductible, the TUF was not. So you've got pros and cons on all sides.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to, it was great that we got in my opinion, I think it's a great timing that we received the information from the survey results. And I personally was surprised that streets all the way around have come. And from what we heard from people in the city council meeting here we did our public forum on, people want their streets. They want the streets to be good, they want their streets repaired, they want their streets in good condition. So what that means is we all have to hold hands. I mean, what that could mean is we all have to hold hands, and that means we need at least $775,000 a year to maintain something that still is not meeting the overall needs we have in the city from a street perspective.
I think, if I may, we were trying to keep it at $72, as close as we could, for, like, say, a $150,000 house. So the 4.5 mils is $77. The top was $72. So we're pretty close there on a $150,000 house. No,
I didn't realize
this
that.
plan won't work for future if the sales tax does not pass. And then next year we'll be at the same point doing it again, because we have to keep our streets up. So it's sales tax versus.
Even if this, no disrespect, but even if the sales tax passed, we still don't have enough money to meet our needs from a street perspective, given
Fix them all at once, no.
well, not even fixing them all at once, but given the core sampling and the results that we've seen on the streets we had on the plan. So the whole crux of the street thing is we had streets targeted for mill and overlay, and they are not able to be mill and overlay. They need full depth replacement. That comes to a tune of another at least $1 million on average a year for us to do that full depth replacement. And then in our city council meeting last time, I heard it's $7 to $11 million shortfall that we have based on that information that we received. So I just want everybody to be aware that even if we get a sales tax increase and we do the 4.5 mils and we do the 5 ERUs, we still don't have enough money. We haven't even started talking about all the secondary stormwater that we need in order to make the interceptor down Johnson Drive to even be really useful.
We can only do one thing at a time.
Right.
And we can't fix all the streets at once. We're gonna have to fix the worst ones and just keep on going down the road.
Right, and the plan
Unless we
is-
wanna get into more debt.
Yeah, our plan has never been to fix all the streets at once, so I just want to make sure everybody
Right.
understands that that's never been a plan and that's not the proposal. It's just the current plan isn't, the streets that we have scheduled for mill and overlay truly need a full depth replacement.
Well, with the 4.5 mils and a quarter cent sales tax would net us, how much more per year?
Well, if we
I
look
mean,
at,
well, you figure conservative than I do.
and you figure a little about that, and I don't have the pen. One of the things that we talked about was hearing, I think, a desire in general to proceed with the sales tax. How do you prepare and package a sales tax in a way that allows you to deliver a clear and consistent message to the voters when they're going to approve that? And so, because we haven't really clearly quantified, sitting here today, because we're still waiting on some core sampling, what those full depth replacement costs are, and then I think that allows you, that packaging the full depth reconstruction in the larger CARS eligible projects allows you to sort of then say, this is what, with approval of a sales tax, we would be able to address, and between now and the time we would take something forward, we're going to do our best to say, and this is the time horizon over which you can do it with, right, X amount of sales tax. Because that's going to be the other question, is the amount of money, and then how much do you need? And I think we're really close to being able to quantify that, and then how quickly do you want to accomplish that? How quickly question depends on your appetite for pay-as-you-go versus debt financing, right, to a certain extent. So those are some of the questions that I think before you move forward with the sales tax question, we have to have some continued conversation around recognizing that we don't have enough sales tax authority left to be able to address all of those things that you just.
Well, we couldn't raise
Quickly.
the sales tax enough though to address all the needs. It's just,
Right.
it's a
But
lot.
the sales tax brings in a lot more than a mill.
Mhm. So, you know, it's
It shares
business
differently.
and development, and that's really our ultimate goal, is just to increase economic
Well, I
development
know, I
in
mean,
this
that's the
area.
number one thing, city
Yeah.
is spending years to promote redevelopment, we can't even talk about that because of all this, the stormwater and street stuff, problem, situation that we have.
But I think that's how you encourage redevelopment. You take care of the things that you can take care of.
Well, we did in
We
the,
take care of our streets, we take care of our stormwater, and I think when we take care of those two things, you're looking down, up and down Johnson Drive right now, our actions have not driven businesses out of the mission. To the contrary, it's brought them in. I'm in agreement with Amy. I don't think 4.5 goes far enough. I understand the rationale behind putting it to the voters, putting it on a ballot from a sales tax perspective, but I think that can be detrimental to business development. When you talk about, come to our community, we have one of the highest sales tax rates of any community in northeast Johnson County, and it's not like you have to move 10 miles away. You can move 10 blocks away and you can be in 3 other jurisdictions. And I've said it once and I'll say it again tonight, I think leaders lead. What we've got to do is keep investing in our community. And investing in our community is investing in the things that we can fix. And those are our streets. And yes, we can't do it all at once overnight. But what I also don't want to do is lose the momentum that I think has built some really positive momentum for us over these last 5 years. And everybody around this table has contributed to it. And I think that we've got to keep moving forward. And so, I would much rather see us do something unpopular and say, let's push for 7 mills, not count on a sales tax, and keep investing in our community. But I will support 4.5. I will support $5 ERU increase if we think that is the minimum. But as Steve said, look, we're going to be right back here at this spot a year from now. And I'd rather do something courageous now that
if the sales
puts
tax.
us on the right path to continuing to invest in our community, because I don't want there to be an air pocket in the pump, if you will. I don't want blight and things to begin deteriorating around us. I want to keep moving forward because I think we can all look out there right now and say, when we invest and when we build, good things happen.
Well, I agree, you guys, I mean, Knoll, Row, Markway, Johnson Drive, 17 million in the stormwater at the east end. We have put a lot into our infrastructure, and it is beautiful, and but I don't want to be debt driven either, when I have to make decisions because we can't afford to pay the debt. And that's where a lot of our money goes in our budget, is just for debt service. And
I understand. I mean, it
Yeah.
is about
it's
future.
a balance.
It is a balance, and it is about future preference, because it is saying, yes, we are going to take on some pain, and we're going to take on some payments over a 10-year or 15-year horizon, because guess what? We don't get a do-over. We don't get 2015 back, or we don't get 2001 to 2010 back. I mean, that is either going to determine whether we're attracting businesses and young people to our community, or whether or not we're going to allow blight to take hold of our community. And I think we continue to invest. That's
Yeah,
what-
definitely. Well, we're already out 2031 though on some of this debt, and we'll take on more debt. That's probably a given at a certain point, but it would be nice to not be debt driven. To have that flexibility, to have the funds to make a decision, because we can.
Well, and as I've said before too, there's one thing to have debt, there's another thing to have structural debt. And structural debt is what you have at the federal level, where they truly do not have enough revenue to pay for their debt servicing. That's not the position that we're in. We're making decisions between how much strength do we want in our general fund, right, versus how much shared pain do we want to have, and who ought to share it. And with us taking a sidestep from the TUF this year, the businesses will, in general, benefit greatly with a lower tax bill in the aggregate versus our residents. But I also think, Amy, you have mentioned the survey. It's pretty clear. Encourage responsible redevelopment and continue to fix our streets. And I mean, I think that's our obligation. And the other piece of it was 84% of the people said, yeah, charge me at least $1 or more a month. right? And most people were charging me $6 or $11 more a month because it's worth it to me. And I get it's hard, but I think that's why we're sitting in these seats.
And I think we can, go ahead.
I just have one more questions about this thing.
Well, I mean, you look at this map here, I mean, we have made considerable road on our plan, and we're sticking with our plan. This year, we've already approved, what streets we're gonna do. With the 4.5, we have enough to continue that next year. If we get the sales tax, and then we can start with the full depth. If we don't get it, yes, we have to be back, and we have to put more mills on. I know once you put mills on, if we put 7 on now, and we tried for the sales tax, we're not gonna take it, we're not gonna lower it, like I said. We
You lowered
just
it
don't lower
before, you lowered it before.
But we're good for the next year anyway.
Yeah, like
And
more
usually
tax
sales
changes
tax
like
is
a
always
year.
passed. Mail ballot,
I did have somebody say that they would prefer the sales tax because they prefer to share the burden with the people who come in during the day,
So on this, it does seem like we're missing some pockets, and are we just missing these pockets because they were repaired sooner than, you know what I mean? Like Lamar, I get Lamar, it's not, right, because it's not infinite repair, but like in this like lower or upper right-hand corner and the lower right-hand corner, there seems to be some pockets of communities that don't have any colors.
So Lamar.
I don't care about Lamar, I didn't ask about Lamar, but.
So some of those streets are gonna be your CARS eligible projects, and so those are gonna be the bigger ones. The
In
other
the upper right hand, where would Fox Ridge isn't over here?
Fox Ridge,
In the upper right hand?
that's not us.
Oh,
Yep.
that's
So
why.
the big blue line, the big blue line is our city limits.
Got it, that was not a specific cut.
Sorry about that, I should have said
I
that very
apologize,
early
I
on.
didn't, I was never mind, you can ignore my question.
and we're not voting on anything tonight. I mean, everybody has, a chance to think everything over and see what they think would be best to do. I hate to burden our residents. We want to be responsible, that's for sure, and we need to keep the streets program up like we have it. And we will. Sales tax doesn't go, then we will definitely have to raise the mills more.
So I don't
We're
know-
gonna have to be up there.
I don't know if you guys want to share this pull factor information or not. I mean, I just think it's interesting information from a sales tax perspective.
We can, we had looked at calculating pull factor, which is the amount of people that are coming into or going out of your community to spend their sales tax dollars. The state used to calculate that, and Glenn has done some calculations, so we'll put that in the packet that goes out Friday for the committee agenda, so everybody can have a chance. But we're at about, so 1 is even, and I think we've calculated we're at about 1, if I remember, 1 point, I gave you my.
1.42, yeah, 1.28 in the county of Johnson County. So, I'm trying to, I think this is the 4.5 mils, the first page, right?
Yes.
So it'd be great if we had page numbers.
Okay.
The other thing is, I think the $220,000 of department capital, equipment expense, I personally would vote for a little bit more inclusive of the information that's in the packet on other things that we are considering kind of making a commitment to. Because by reading just this PowerPoint, it sounds like all we're committing to is deferring $220,000 and we're not reducing really any other general expenditures. And I think staff tries very, very hard to do that. So I think adding a few little bullets or something, I know it kind of throws the dynamic of the page off, but you might just consider that just to let residents know we're working really hard at the overall budget, not just this 220. The other thing that I have is a question about the cost recovery goal for the community center. So the increase to 90% that has no negative impact on our shortfall, right? It's not taking any additional money out. It's simply reducing the expenditures.
It's actually adding more money to the general fund, so it's putting the general fund in a better
It's a
position.
positive, okay, so I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Cost recovery and then the whole 90% thing just seems, it kind of confuses me. And then why have we not discussed, or have we discussed an increase, so if we're gonna increase mills for the general population, why not increase the mill on Rock Creek 1 and 2? I know their mill's already higher. Cause they don't pay any transportation utility fee today?
No, they do. The gateway doesn't because the site is vacant and it's not generating traffic. So they pay a stormwater utility fee, they don't pay a transportation utility fee currently, but at whatever point, well, we aren't assessing the transportation utility fee, but in the Rock Creek Drainage District number 2, you have other businesses, so Mission Mart, Mission Wool, all of those things along that Martway corridor, as well, all the way up through Lamar. So we have a few single-family property owners, so they're actually paying that mill levy. So there's real property taxes, there's some personal property taxes because people have vehicles, and then they're paying stormwater utility fees, and in the past had been paying transportation utility fees. So that people in residents and businesses in those drainage districts are currently paying, and have been since 2007, I think, 10.5 mils more already than everybody else throughout the city of Mission.
So they're paying 21 mils.
But, I mean, I totally get it, right? But again, they're not gonna pay the transportation utility fee, right? And so now the rest of the city's picking it up for them. I was just wondering what the discussion was on not increasing that.
I think in part because you've really sort of committed to that. So the charter ordinances are written so that we can maintain the mill levies the same within both of the benefit districts or any benefit districts that we have. Obviously, the benefit of 10.5 mills would be realized on development at the gateway site. 10.5 mills on increased property values on that site is going to generate a heck of a lot more than $4,000 to $5,000 a year. And so I think we're trying to be sensitive because there's not development at that site currently to the impact. So if we reran that chart on the last page of this PowerPoint for your businesses and your property owners in Rock Creek Drainage District number 2, those numbers are already significantly higher. So I think we're just trying to be sensitive to that without the development at the gateway site.
And then my last comment is, I guess I really expected to see, and I almost actually called to make sure this was gonna happen. I really expected to see, here's what like 4 mills, 5 mills, 6 mills, 7 mills looks like. Here's what 3 ERU, 4 ERU, 5 ERU, you know, like a whole kind of comparison across a standard residential, a standard business, you know, putting all these structures into place. So did I miss that?
No, we didn't so the question is,
I was just trying to get a better understanding for exactly how this is impactful to our businesses versus our residents, and what are all the different options, because it seems to me, I mean, I personally am not yet but 4.5. I feel like I need more information to make a decision. It's crazy that Dave and I somewhat agree. Would you mind just?
Now, why would you say that?
I love it. I appreciate it. It makes me feel better about my thoughts. It's a compliment. And I would like to see kind of what 5 or 6 or 7 mills would look like for a homeowner, because is it almost $150 instead of 77 or 7, because 4.5, I mean, so 3.5 would be half of 4.5.
Like if you do on that chart, I think you times it by
17.25. So one mill, every mill on a $150,000 house is $17.25. So I think what we tried to do, because we've got charts coming out of our ears with all of that. What we tried to do was say, okay, let's take, I think the themes that we heard were, we don't want to take a step backwards. We're not quite sure how, the speed at which we might want to continue a forward pace. We definitely don't want to take a step backward in terms of our investment in infrastructure. We want to try to balance any increases in revenues between, and their impact whether because ERUs impact differently than TUF impacted differently than mill levy. So we want to kind of share that between our businesses, our residents, and the operating departments of the city, and try to keep kind of all of that spread a little bit evenly, which is kind of, I think, where we landed on this proposal. But we can give you any combination of sliding scales of, this essentially puts, at 5 ERUs, you essentially put your stormwater, recognizing we haven't touched this whole larger secondary stormwater issue. But this sort of puts this to rest for the next several years from that perspective. It doesn't require us to take a step backward. As we evaluate a sales tax in more detail, it kind of keeps us on pace, recognizing that if the sales tax didn't pass, we would have a gap from where we were with the TUF for that, and we may want to be more aggressive in that regard, and it kind of balances that investment or that increased investment from our residents, and it spreads that. So we can, you tell us what you want to see. It becomes, depending on what combination, so on a single family property, one ERU is going to be, you take the rate at which you set the ERU, so if it's $23 a month, you take $23 times 12, and that's your annual stormwater utility fee. 28 is the $5 increase, so that's what gets you to that, so every dollar adds 12, right? Every dollar adds $12 to your stormwater utility fee. And on a $150,000 house, every mill adds $17.25. On a $250,000 house, every mill adds $34.50. Commercial properties, they're assessed at a different rate, and because their stormwater rates are based on their equivalent ERUs, kind of all over the board. So we can, when we've got some comparisons, those become more difficult to run the whole, laundry list of scenarios on.
So I don't know, does anybody else want to see different? Are you guys done? You do? I do. And I personally, I want to see sales tax at the table. I wouldn't mind seeing all three things and everybody sharing in it.
I think this brings sales tax to the table, to the extent that we can in adopting a budget. Oh, the impact of, when you say bring sales tax to the table, how that would impact what somebody pays?
So the comment in here was looking at it potentially 6 months down the road. Right?
It takes that long to.
Yeah.
We can't get an election on the ballot.
I
So,
understand all that.
yeah, so I think the proposed budget anticipates that we would move forward with the sales tax election.
I have an indirect question. It's not directly related to the budget, but it's indirectly related where we are lacking revenue right now. The next work session we have one in August. Can we focus on economic development options that we currently have on the table or need to put on the table where we're lacking big revenue pieces like Hobby Lobby, like the insurance company, like some of those big properties that we are, garnering revenue for those at some point will make a big difference, I think, in the way we look at the budget overall, but it's an indirect process.
So back to the other question. So they have charts and everything, doesn't it? So RC and I want to see, does anybody else want to see other?
I do. And I even like
The more the better.
Okay. That's what I thought today was about. So.
Do we have any idea on that property?
I'm assuming you're referring, well, let me go back to chart. So, we'll have to play around a little bit with formats. So if there's any, so you want to see 1, 2, 5, what range on all of these things do you want?
So you showed me something, right, when we met?
Yeah, we looked at a previous work session, we took a $2 ERU and 7 mills. And then I think we also showed you, $2 and 7 mills, right? Well, that was elimination of, reduction of TUF by starting to reduce TUF. So that was prior to the Court of Appeals decision. We were talking about starting to reduce the top and potentially replace it with mills. So that, after we got the Court of Appeals decision and we said we aren't gonna assess top, that sort of changed our conversation. So you had a chart that showed you $2 per ERU increase in 7 mills.
It goes in, so,
So I think across the top, it will tell you,
top of 7 mills would add to ERU.
so if you look at that chart, very top line is probably going to show, and that's probably not the one where you put,
No test. No bill replacement, bill equivalent.
so if you came out here, your annual increase at 2 ERUs and 7 mills, it's small, but I think that says $62.62. On 120, okay, so on a $150,000 house, that was $72.76 for $6 a month. So we can run every iteration in between there, but your range is, so it will be helpful, I think, for us if you can tell us kind of a range. What's that target range?
And so then I think, what's the total? What is 7 mills and 2 ERU? Does 7 mills and 2 ERU get us $525,000 and $775,000?
No.
It gets
2
us
ERUs gets you
$770,000.
$180,000, so you have to go back and you have to make up that shortfall in your general fund in some fashion. Greater than what you're doing now. And 7 mills gets you $775,000 on the street side, but it leaves you,
So 7 mills plus 5 ERUs, so 3 more ERUs, which is doubles this, so it's 360 plus, gives you 450, right? And then that's $5 a month. 5 ERUs. So 3 ERUs more is 12 times 3, 36,000. I don't know, I guess, I would like to see what 7 mills and 5 ERUs look like from a total perspective and then a business perspective, and then this chart for 4.5 mil and 5 ERU. Do we want something in the middle? I'm not saying I would vote for either one of those, to be frank. So we have to come up with something that we would vote on, that we would agree to. So is there something else anybody's thinking, some other combination?
No, I think C is important too, I agree with you.
okay, so,
Is there another one, do we want to do, I don't know, do we want to do 3 RUs and 6 mills? I mean, I don't know, that's what I'm trying to come up with. Or do you think we can extrapolate the information and get it fairly quickly from there?
I think you can get in that ballpark.
I think it would be great too, in the next one, which if we had this and we can just like plug the numbers in and see it over here, what about this, what about that, what about this, what about that?
Yeah.
You guys just display it up there. That's easy enough.
The ERUs are not tax deductible.
Correct. I think technically that is correct. My guess is there are a lot of people who include it.
I would guarantee you almost everybody has no idea. If you go back and look at your taxes.
Okay, so tell me, so we have the 7 mills, 2 ERUs, we're gonna do
7 and 5.
7 and 5.
4.5 and 5.
And 4.5.
And then.
What about sales tax, are you gonna add that in, increase too? You wanna know what that's gonna, how that's gonna affect?
The body, it would be, is there something that shows that, or because see, what I would also like to see is how does that impact these numbers? Do we have that? How does it impact our street program?
The street programs?
And our CI stormwater plan and.
It wouldn't impact the stormwater, would it?
ERUs.
Oh, yeah, the ERUs, what am I thinking? The ERUs, but sales tax.
Sales tax, if you use it for, if you dedicate it to streets, would not impact your stormwater program. So if you look at the street program, if you added, let's just say, a quarter cent, so if you went for a quarter cent sales tax, you're gonna add another $500,000 into this street program plan.
Because it all builds and cascades, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we care what these look like, right?
It doesn't have to be 3/4 sales tax. I mean,
Right.
Can you give us a couple of options, maybe?
Can I,
It
yeah,
doesn't
quarter,
have to be,
3/4.
yeah, it doesn't have to be 3/4 sales tax.
A quarter, 1/4, not 3/4.
we have 3/8 cent authority left, so we could go no higher than 3/8 of a cent. And I don't remember, we have so many budget memos out here. I think it's in this packet we talk about, so on page 11 of this transmittal, we talk about, so an eighth of a cent, so you typically go in 8-cent increments, right? So an eighth of a cent is gonna generate 275,000, quarter cent is gonna generate 550,000, and a 3/8 cent is gonna generate about $825,000.
And I guess, I'm sorry, my brain can't think, this doesn't mean anything, I get those numbers, but what does it mean? What does it mean to our 5-year plan? What does it mean to the overall bottom line? What does that do? Does anybody else care about that? Because I'm not looking to bring any more work to anybody, but I mean, I think that that's ultimately, what are those things? Where's the shortfall we're trying to make up? The shortfall we're trying to make up is stormwater, streets, and overall expenses.
Well, I can tell you, if you look at the street program plan that we started with, a couple of months ago, you could add $825,000 to that, and you would still, I think you would be balanced by the end of a 5-year program. But if we plugged back in the Fox Ridge projects and the second half of the Johnson Drive project, and that only had full depth reconstructions at $100,000 a year, which we knew would be insufficient. If we passed our full authority on a 3/8 cent sales tax and plugged that back into the 5-year program, you couldn't do everything pay as you go. You'd still have to look at debt financing over the next 5 years. But we can run that, or we can very easily drop back in a quarter cent. So let's just say you dropped in a quarter cent, okay? And then the question becomes, how much of that do you want to dedicate? We could easily do $500,000 of full depth reconstruction every year based on the core sample numbers that we've seen so far, right? So you could spend all of that quarter cent on full depth reconstruction and not be socking anything away to do Fox Ridge or Johnson Drive or Broadmoor or any of those other big projects. Or you could split that and you could say we're gonna do, I mean, if you look at that list, some of the projects are big, but you could probably pick off a full depth reconstruction street for $250,000 a year. So are we doing, what's the right level for full depth reconstruction? And then it would take you a while. Again, you're not going to do your big CARS eligible projects on a pay-as-you-go basis over the next 5 or really even the next 10 years without debt financing. But we can create a new street program that drops that in and shows you that. I just need to know which.
I guess I'm just trying to understand the bottom line.
It's complex, it's really complex, especially if you're looking at a 5 and a 10-year term. You want to reserve in there, so every 2 years we're not having to go back, either increasing something or looking for funds elsewhere.
Well, we can look too and see when things start dropping off from, some of the debt service. Just keep something constant.
If you look on the street program plan side, what you can see is that your debt service is existing street debt service is gonna drop off in 2023. So it's set to basically expire at the same time as your existing quarter cent sales tax. And you drop in 2022, you lose about half. Current debt service for streets right now is about $745,000 a year. So if you did nothing to replace TUF, your quarter cent sales tax and your special highway revenues give you enough to cover your debt service and do nothing more. So if you want to continue any kind of additional residential street maintenance program, you've got to replace it with some kind of additional revenue stream.
So these in the packet were representative of the 4.5 mils and the 5-year.
Yes.
You know, to get a totally accurate picture, you'd almost have to understand the makeup of construction materials too, because you would think that as we, you know, generate more intelligence about how streets are made up and what traffic patterns do to streets, that we would have concrete, cement, et cetera, that would be longer lasting at some point. But we don't have all those answers, and it's, you know, we just don't know what's occurring.
You can plan, but stuff happens.
Right, it's gonna be more expensive no matter what. It might last longer, but it's gonna be more expensive.
Well, not everything's
It's probably not gonna get
you know,
cheaper.
yeah.
On the whole, on the balance, street programs don't get cheaper. Because of materials.
Based on the question that was asked on the survey about sidewalks, I know it came up about sidewalk maintenance. Is that on the current sidewalks that currently exist in neighborhoods, or is that also an added component that's asking people if they want sidewalks on the streets?
We had a sidewalk plan we talked about at one time, not necessarily creating new sidewalks, right? It was just maintaining the ones we had.
Would we have inventory of sidewalk maintenance requirements right now?
So if you look at the question for the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go back and we can put page numbers on this one. So if you look at the three items residents believe would have the greatest impact, it says more sidewalks.
Yeah.
And then if you drop down a couple of bars, it says better maintained. So we tried to ask that question in both ways. Is it just the quality of the existing sidewalks, or would you like more sidewalks? We asked both. So if you look at more sidewalks came in as number 2 at 38%. If you drop down 2 more items, it says better maintained sidewalks. So they're pretty close. So more sidewalks and maintenance of sidewalks is people feel is pretty important to the quality of their neighborhood.
Yeah, so how do we get a better gauge of where sidewalks are needed?
Well, I believe we have an inventory, right? We have a sidewalk inventory. The other thing we've talked about in the past is you almost have to, so this becomes very neighborhood specific in some cases, where there are some neighborhoods that absolutely want sidewalks and some neighborhoods that absolutely don't want sidewalks.
And
Don't
mixed.
want sidewalks.
You got mixed too.
Yes.
And the people want sidewalks until they know how much of their yard it's gonna take
It's
up,
going
and
to
then
take
what
up.
they're responsible for
Exactly.
keeping up as well.
So I think that would be, that's part of an ongoing conversation to say, we can look at that inventory, we can identify where we're missing sidewalks, or, and then we figure out how we initiate those conversations to say, are those neighborhoods, how do we get to, whether that's someplace where the residents want that investment or not.
And aren't we just okayed that study for transportation, schools, children? So that, a lot of information should come out of that.
Because that's a funding issue too. If there's several sidewalks added, I mean, that's. a
But,
funding
you know-
Every time you add a piece of infrastructure,
Right.
you add a maintenance
That's
cost.
right.
So we've got that, and that study should really identify some problem areas for schools and children.
For schools, yes. Yes.
So that would be, kind of help us prioritize, I would think.
I mean, Jason and I are here with a little side conversation, but people want walkable cities, and that means sidewalks, and if you want young families in your cities, you need sidewalks so they can push their strollers on the sidewalks, you know what I mean?
Well, I think, and what you'll see when you get all of the direction finder results, and again, part of this, one of the things that we really tried to break down, because trails have historically rated high on our direction finder surveys. And we wanted to understand, what does that mean? Does that mean trails within parks, trails within our city limits, or regional trail connections? And I think what you'll see when you see all of the results is that people want trails within the city limits. So the better connections, regional trails and trails within parks kind of fell below that. I think the message is fairly consistent about, trying to look and make those connections to address that issue of walkability. So that's something we'll unravel through the rest of the Parks Master Plan process in a little bit more detail. But again, our hope with this direction finder was to take some of those questions we've asked at the higher level and be a little bit more specific, because we now have You know, back in 2007, we were just on the front end of street maintenance programs and park maintenance programs and sidewalk maintenance programs. Now it's important for us to understand, what does that mean? Is it just better maintenance? Is it more of any of those pieces?
The other thing is the stormwater was not a priority.
It's not crazy.
I get that, but it was not, it didn't make the top
No, it didn't, but
7.
stormwater
It's a
debt
reality.
is
Yeah,
a huge reality.
Well, we don't know what
Yes.
they
And I
want
would
for that
tell
over
you,
the
I
next
think if
12.
we'd had this rainy season that we've had this year and we hadn't made the investment that we've made to date in Rock Creek, that stormwater number would have been significantly higher because people would have seen it. You don't, you know, what we have is controlling, particularly in the commercial areas.
Flood on Lamar and Fox Ridge, I mean, Markway, that's true, you could drive through the intersection. So,
That's
yeah.
funny, I know, could not have been told recently.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're not overtopping the creek behind the businesses on Johnson Drive. So I think that makes a big difference, and we can't, you know, would have loved to, for a couple of rain events, not had some of those systems in place, just so you could really understand the difference, but.
Would it help anybody to have more than one scenario, going back to the house situations that GRUs and the various scenarios, would it help anybody to have more than $150,000 house work for?
I think
You
that's
guys
We'll
what,
give
get
you
two
that,
points.
we'll give you that
Amy
bigger
said.
list with a variety of different businesses and.
It's like 120, 150, 200.
Yeah.
So we're gonna probably take the houses down, so we'll probably just give you on the house side, 150, 250. You can kind of extrapolate from there, and then we'll give you more business examples.
And you know, the ERUs that we're asking to vote on in increase, it's not gonna be extra stormwater money, that's just taking care of our current
Right.
debt.
Yep.
So.
If
Same
you
thing with
look,
the
I will tell you,
utility.
yeah.
All of it's just taking care
But
of
you
the
know,
current.
Amy,
It's
they
not-
didn't have this specified, this is a fairly new street maintenance program. You know, some of these things are fairly new instituted, they didn't have any of that, they didn't have the, you know,
That's exactly
the
right.
budget.
They didn't have a plan.
We didn't have streets repaired either.
Yeah, right.
I mean, so yeah, there's a lot of, in the last decade, the major construction is phenomenal. And in the last 3 years, just the sidewalks, the street maintenance, the fund balance, those are big changes just in the last 3 years, really. So, I mean, there's progress, even though it comes in front of us and we're going, oh, gee.
Yeah.
But you know, when you look at it, it's a lot of change in a decade.
No doubt about it, we turned a lot of corners, and it's not without sacrifice either.
No. No. But, I mean, we've got some fairly good options. It's not like just maintaining what we got. You know, like I didn't even want to increase the ERUs as much as we did. But, you know, now that we're looking at a revenue stream to actually take care of the debt and decrease the stormwater debt, you know, I mean, it is that balance. I'm looking at it a little bit different.
On the street program plans, that would be helpful if I run this sheet with putting in, the 4.5 mils, 7 mils, and then putting in sales tax revenue. Okay. And so what, you need that in order? Thanks.
I'm not a proponent of sales tax increase. Sales tax to death right now. And I think there's a lot of people out there who don't have any money, and that's the last thing they need is another increase. I understand.
You need to give
I understand.
Debbie that sheet.
But sometimes you can buy less. You can't buy less food, you can't buy less gas.
Well, you could go to
But-
Missouri, and you could pay like 4% sales tax for your
Well, and I
food
do go to,
versus
I don't
your-
go to Missouri for my food.
Yeah,
I
go
do
to
for my
it.
gas.
Go to Target in Missouri and buy food and buy personal items like toilet paper and see the difference in the sales tax you pay. And how many people do that? How many people go over to St. Laurent to do that?
Cigarettes and alcohol, I know they do.
And gas.
There's gas and alcohol, you know it, Missouri's got to go one
Okay,
day.
let me ask this then, stormwater program side, program plan side, does anybody have an appetite to see anything different than 5-year increase? 2 ERU. Okay.
That's good, we'll see all the scenarios. And then, we should project
Yeah, it would be awesome if we could have some real-time flexibility.
I think we can do that.
maybe driving 30 to follow on.
We'll buy her some two-bucket truck.
Stop drinking that, sorry.
I'm driving a two-bucket truck now, what I heard is not two buckets.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, but they won't fix it by
Gas in
70.
Warrensburg right now is 238 gallons.
Okay,
Well,
so,
do we have any more discussion? Or you
I
gonna-
know, I'm done. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Don't do it tonight.
Oh.
Go home.
One other thing, when we come in next council meeting, we're going to change seating arrangement. I think I mentioned that to a few.
Oh,
Uh, Martha, Laura, and myself thought it might be better if the committee chairs were right in the center to give their reports. So, and then we'll adjust from there. So
so watch before you sit down.
there's about 4 people changing, and we're staying exactly where they're at. So, yes, that's right. Look at the name tag.
Thank you, Steve, save us some embarrassment.
Anything else, anybody? I would say this meeting's adjourned then.
Parks and Recreation Master Plan Open House tomorrow night, 6 to 8. at the
Ward
community
2
center.
meeting, 7 to 8.
Do you have cookies?
I will have cookies. What kind do you want?
Any kind is fine by me. I will be there.
Okay.